Hello, my name is Karen Hughes, and I am the Domestic Violence Clinical Services Coordinator for the Life Crisis Center, and I want to welcome you to Life Crisis Today. Child abuse is often in the news, and if it's been reported to social services or the law enforcement, often the child's going to have to testify. And to testify is scary. It's scary for adults, and it's definitely scary for children. Well, there is a special program called CASA. We're going to be talking about that today. And I want to welcome Jerrona Smith. She is the Regional Director for CASA. Welcome, Jerrona.
Thank you, Karen. Glad to be here.
Yeah. CASA, that's a special program. Tell me about it.
It's a very special program. CASA stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocates. And what we do is we advocate in the courts on behalf of abused and neglected children.
Mm-hmm. What's the history? How long has it been around, and what's the history of CASA?
Okay, the history of CASA started with Judge David Sukup, who was a judge in Washington State. He was going to make a decision. He wanted to make a decision on behalf of a child that they were hearing a case for. And he felt like there were a lot of professionals there, like social workers, attorneys, other people that had a part to the case. But before he made a decision based on permanency or a permanent outcome for that child, he really felt like he didn't have enough background information to make a permanent decision that would affect that child, that would have an effect on that child's life for the rest of his or her life. So that's when he started the CASA program. He asked for a few volunteers from within the community to just meet for lunch so he could describe to them some of the things that he needed them to do. And out of that request, he got 50 volunteers, and the program just kept growing and expanding to what we have today. CASA's in all of the states across the United States, I think except for South Dakota. But, you know, it's a widely spread program. Okay.
You talked about the volunteers. What do they do for the children?
Volunteers, first of all, have to build a rapport with those children. Because what they do is they speak on behalf of that child in court. They're the child's voice in the court. They speak to what is in that the child's best interest, you know, and we work at the discretion of the judge. So we want to be able to provide the judge with all of the relevant background information that pertains to that child. And how do you do that? You know, you have to build that rapport with that child.
Right. And so they work with the children. What kinds of things do they do with the children?
As a CASA volunteers, they can typically work at their own discretion. You know, some things they do have to get permission to do, like carrying a child across state lines. If they want to take their child to a fair, they can do that. If they want to take the child to dinner, they can do that. I have CASAs now who one of the child's requests is just to simply go to Walmart. So they can go to Walmart, walk around and look at some of the things they think they would want to purchase, you know, create their wish list or the CASA wish list. So those are just some of the things that our CASAs do.
Now that's what they do with the children. What do they do is more on the professional side?
On the professional side, what our CASAs do is they speak with family members, which can be biological parents, foster parents. They can speak to whomever is involved in that child's case. Our CASAs do receive a letter of appointment that is actually signed by the judge. So this gives them permission to speak to anyone that's pertinent to that child, the teachers, doctors, attorneys. And so what that CASA is doing is just like gathering background information in order to give that little tidbit to the judge in order to help him or her make a sound decision. They're like the eyes and ears for the courts.
Okay. So if I wanted to be a volunteer, what kind of training would I get?
If you wanted to be a volunteer, first of all, we would ask you to complete an online application. And once we receive that application, then we go through, some people call it an interview, but we like to call it a talk because we want to get to know you better. We want to, when we're matching children with CASAs, we want to be able to make that match based off of personality types, you know, or who's can best fit that child's needs. So there is also that training portion where nowadays it's basically online because of Corona and the things that have happened, but it's typically 30 to 35 hours worth of training that's done self-paced, and we meet online like once a week to review the materials. And so after the training, what happens is that you are actually sworn in by the judge. So there's an actual ceremony where you are sworn in, and you can be at that time, after that time, appointed to serve a child.
Okay. Okay. So if I am the volunteer and I am assigned to them, what would be the process be for me? How long would I be with the child? What's the process?
Okay, so upon receiving your first assignment, we would have what we like to call a file review. This is where we give you information about the child. We give you some information about what brought them into care, just because of HIPAA, So after you receive that information, then we go out with you. The CASA staff, which typically is the volunteer supervisor, they go out and we like to have a home visit where we meet with the foster parent, we meet with the child, you introduce yourself. It's just very light introductions so that they know who we are, they know who you are. And then after that, what CASA likes to do is at least have you visit your child at least once a month. Do a face-to-face visit once a month. And we understand because of COVID and things like that, some people are still a little bit uncomfortable. So what we've been allowed to do is FaceTime. You can go to the door. You can talk through the door with your child. You can call them on the phone. You can text. That's what kids like to do now.
Definitely.
So you can text. It's just like a constant communication because things change almost daily in these children's lives. So once you are appointed, then it's up. We can give you advice on things to do with the child, but basically you're doing what you feel is best to build a rapport with that child, to get them comfortable with you.
And what the child's interests are.
What their interests are, so that we can represent them appropriately when we go to court. So ultimately, after you've built that rapport with the child, and, CASAs make recommendations during hearings. We're not parties to the hearing, but we're actually friends of the court. So that judge allows us to make written recommendations on that child's behalf, which is actually entered in as evidence. So as a CASA, you've gotten to meet this child. You've hung out with this child. You've been to their home. You've taken them out to dinner. You've just gone riding. So you've built sort of like a friendship with this child, so you begin to understand their needs. You begin to understand what their wishes are. And then you begin to put pieces of a puzzle together and in having a conversation with that child so that you can better speak to what is in that child's best interest. Because that is what we represent in the courtroom. We represent that child's best wishes. And children, we serve children from birth all the way up until they age out at 21.
Oh, wow.
So children can come in, as infants that were left in the hospital, or they can come in as teenagers, due to no fault of their own.
Right.
And be considered a child in need of assistance.
Yeah. How long would a volunteer stay with a child?
Typically, we ask that our volunteers at least see the case through until the child is placed in a permanent home. That could take 6 months. It could take a year. It could take a few weeks. It could take several years. But the volunteer is doing what he or she feels comfortable, It's basically up to that volunteer, but most of our volunteers have built such a strong bond with the kids that they serve that they want to be that voice for that child in the court. Like once they are assigned a case, they do not let go.
Okay.
And I even have volunteers now who basically one I spoke with yesterday who said, he's been with his child for 5 years. And that child, even when his case closes, is going to remain a part of his family.
Okay. Okay.
So that is the bond they built. I mean, I don't expect that for every volunteer, from every volunteer, but in that instance,
Right.
that is the bond that they have built.
Right. So it's a choice, at least through the court case, they stay with them. But then after that, it's a choice with the volunteer and the family as to
Right.
what's needed.
If the child is adopted, then of course it's up to the parents
Right.
to decide whether they want, someone else
Still in their life.
still in their lives. But most of the time we don't have an issue with that. Some of our families and adoptive families have asked that the CASA continue to be in that child's life because they have forged such a great relationship.
Right.
And that's typically how it works.
I can imagine that it's child abuse, so that's heavy work. How the volunteers, how do they get support, or are there activities for them so that they can feel supported in their work?
Yeah, there's a lot of attention being focused now on helping the helper. Like sometimes, because it is heavy work. And, some of these cases, we have cases for kids who are, have been physically abused to an extent that they're in different stages of healings. They're, broken bones and things like that. And our CASAs take on these cases. So every now and then we have to have practice wellness for ourselves. So what do? We have volunteer engagement activities. Last Friday we went to a Shorebirds game. We've had ice cream socials. We've done walk, run, thrive events on the boardwalk, which is basically a marathon where you walk or run. So we have activities where we get together at our offices, at our business location. We've had movie nights. So we do things like that where we can sit down with each other and just let the load off.
Right.
And just relate to one another on that level.
Yeah. Now, abuse happens in all communities. How about the diversifying with the volunteers? Is there a special project you're doing or emphasis on this?
There is a great emphasis, not only for Lower Shore CASA, but the entire national CASA as a program, trying to diversify our volunteer pool. So right now, as the regional director, I'm making a special push in communities of color.
Okay.
Because a lot of the children that we serve are children of color.
Right.
And most times I have been the only person of color in a courtroom. Not that that is extremely horrible, but that is not a representation of the community that we live in. So trying to get people of color to volunteer more has been one of the things that I'm really, really working on and pushing for.
You mentioned that you serve the Lower Shore.
Yes.
So, and I know you've been with Worcester County, but it's expanding. Tell me about that.
Well, I'm so excited about that. Like, this has been a long time coming. We've been working probably for the past 2.5 to 3 years to bring CASA to Wicomico and Somerset counties. So it's finally happening. On July 1st of this year, the CASA program will begin to serve children in Wicomico and Somerset counties. And we will be under our parent organization at that time will become Life Crisis Center.
But physically, where are you going to be?
Our physical location would be the Wicomico County Courthouse.
Okay.
So hopefully, like I said, on July 1, we will be ready to have our kickoff and start serving children. Yes.
Yeah. If I want to be a volunteer, what do I do?
You need to fill out your application. There is a link that we can provide that will take you to an application. You complete the application and that information will populate over to our database. Once we see your name pop up, then we'll begin to reach out to you and we'll start the process. Okay. So
what is the link?
I can be reached right now, or the CASA link is CASA@lifecrisiscenter.org.
Okay. So they can just go right there, and the application will be there, or they can reach you.
They can reach me from that link. And since we're right now working on moving over to the courthouse and moving over to Life Crisis, we're working on building that database right now. But we can get that information out to whoever's interested.
Yay. Do you have like set volunteer trainings, or is it just whenever somebody's ready that it's because it's online?
Well, what we do is we try to build a class. So what we have been doing for the last several months is building a class where we go out, we do outreach in the community, we participate in Third Friday events. Any event that we hear about within the community, we get out there and we outreach, we look for volunteers. And once we get to a certain number, then we go ahead and we prepare to teach a class. Our upcoming class is scheduled to start August 1st. August 1st, we'll have our next class.
So people still have time to reach out?
People still have time to reach out. Yes, they still have time to reach out.
Any last words about CASA? Anything else you wanted to say about CASA?
I just want to let everyone know that CASA is a great program, and I started off as a volunteer myself. And once I began volunteering, I could never shake the program until, to where I am right today as the regional director for such a great program. We need people. We just need everyday citizens who live, work, and in the community, just to sign up. If you have time, you don't need special education, you don't need a degree, you don't need anything of that nature. You just have to have a willing heart to be the voice for these children in the courts.
Does it take a lot of time?
It does not take a lot of time. You give the time that you have to give. What National CASA likes to say is, perhaps giving, if you can, 10 hours a month.
A month, wow.
10 hours a month, if you can do that. If not, then we work with you. But at the least, just you're giving from your heart, so you're doing something. Giving something is better than giving nothing.
And be that voice for the child.
Right.
Well, thank you, Jerrona. And I know this is hard work, but it's rewarding work.
Very much so. Very much so. Every day, I go home feeling like I made a difference for that day, if not just for one child's life. When we go to hearings and different things like that, and seeing and hearing the recommendations made by our volunteers that have really made a difference in that child's outcome for permanency.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I want to thank you for joining us. The Life Crisis Center is there to help you, to be a voice, or to also listen. That's what we're really good at, is listening. We do have a 24-hour hotline, and the hotline number is 410-749-HELP. Again, 410-749-4357. We're also part of the 211 system, which is information and referral. So if you just need to find a referral someplace, I know I Google things all the time, but it's so quick just to call Life Crisis Center and get it through their database for the state of Maryland. We're also part of Text to Chat. For those folks who don't like to chat on the phone but do want to reach out, we do text. And that number is 898-211. Now you will have to put in your zip code for that. We're online. Our website is www.lifecrisiscenter.org. We're also on social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. There's lots of ways to get your answers to your questions, to have someone to just talk to, or if you want to try to be a part of our volunteers, whether through CASA or the Life Crisis Center, reach out. We'd love to help. And I also want to thank PAC 14 to help us make this program available. Thank you.